I'm Jess, and if you told me 11 years ago that my life would take such a wild turn, I'd have laughed it off. But here I am, stuck in a reality I never imagined. It all began innocently enough. I met Jack at a mutual friend's barbecue. He was charming, with a smile that could light up a room, and we hit it off right away. Fast forward through a whirlwind romance, and we were married, living what seemed like a dream. A year into our marriage, our son Max came into the world, making our little family feel complete. Life got real tough when Max started getting sick all the time. My job was on the line, but my boss, Mr. Harris, he was a lifesaver. Jess, you're a rock star at work, and we can't lose you. How about you work from home? Keep an eye on the little guy and keep the ball rolling here, he suggested. And just like that, my living room turned into my new office. Juggling work calls, Max's needs, and household chores became my new norm. But that's where the fairy tale ended and real life began. As I became the superwoman handling it all, something in Jack changed. The man who used to help around the house, who used to play with Max for hours, began to change. It was like he resented me for being at home, even though it was for our son. He'd walk in from work, not even a hello before he'd slump on the couch, eyes glued to his phone. Jack, could you help Max with his homework? I'd ask after a long day of balancing spreadsheets and laundry. I'm beat, Jess. You handle it. You're home all day, aren't you? He'd reply, not even looking up. His words stung, but I bit my tongue. I didn't want to fight in front of Max, who was becoming more perceptive each day. But it wasn't just me. His attitude towards Max shifted too. Gone were the days of patient father-son chats. Now, it was all short, snappy comments. Max, quit being a baby. Man up. Jack would snap when Max struggled with something. I tried to talk to Jack about it, to understand what was eating at him. But every attempt just bounced off him like he was made of stone. Jack, we need to talk. This isn't working, I said one evening when Max was at a sleepover. Here we go again. Nag, nag, nag. You know, maybe if you weren't so busy playing the perfect housewife, you'd see I'm dealing with real stress at work, he retorted, his words laced with a bitterness that took me aback. But we're supposed to be a team, Jack. It's us against the problem, not us against each other, I shot back, my patience wearing thin. Save it, Jess. I've got enough on my plate without home becoming another battlefield, he said, dismissing the conversation with a wave of his hand before storming out. I stood there, in the silence of our living room, feeling more alone than ever. It was like living with a stranger, a man who wore the same face as my husband but carried none of his warmth, none of his love. The shift in Jack's behavior didn't just come out of the blue. It crept in slowly, like a shadow growing longer as the sun sets, until one day, the room was dark. About 3 years back, that's when the late nights started becoming more frequent. Each time Jack walked through the door past midnight, his excuses were as thin as paper. It was a Tuesday, I remember, because Max had just won his soccer game, and we were waiting to celebrate with Jack. But as usual, the chair at the head of the table remained empty. Max's eyes kept darting to the clock, then to the door, and finally, settling on me with a mix of disappointment and confusion. I plastered a smile on my face, trying to keep the mood light. Your dad's really swamped at work, honey. But he's so proud of you, you know that, right? I reassured Max, but the words felt hollow even to me. It wasn't until much later that Jack decided to grace us with his presence. The sound of the door creaking open pulled me out of my troubled thoughts. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the remains of a celebration that never was laid out in front of me. Jack walked in, looking worn out, but there was something else in his demeanor, something off. I could smell the faint trace of perfume, definitely not mine, and it made my stomach churn. Jack, where have you been? Max waited up for you. He won his game today, remember? I tried to keep the accusation out of my voice, but it was hard. The game. Yeah, work, Jess. It's killing me. You know how it is. Jack mumbled, not even bothering to meet my gaze as he made a beeline for the fridge. No, I don't know, Jack. It seems like work is all you ever have to say these days. And what's that smell? Since when do your colleagues wear such strong perfume? I pushed, the words spilling out before I could stop them. Jack's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. What are you implying, Jess? That I'm cheating on you? That's rich, coming from someone who's holed up here all day. The accusation stung, and I felt my face flush with anger. I'm here taking care of our son, our home, while you're out there doing God knows what. And it's not just the perfume, Jack. I found a strand of black hair on your jacket. Last time I checked, my hair was blonde. Jack let out a scoff, his ego inflating like a balloon. Oh, please, Jess. You're being paranoid. You think just because I come home smelling like someone else's perfume, I'm having an affair? Maybe you're just jealous. Maybe you still want me, huh? I was taken aback by his mockery. It wasn't like him. The Jack I knew would have reassured me, would have laughed it off and made me feel like a fool for even doubting. But this man, this stranger in my kitchen, he was egging me on, almost enjoying it. You think this is funny, Jack? Our marriage is hanging by a thread, and you're standing there making jokes? What happened to you? My voice broke, the frustration and hurt I'd been bottling up finally spilling over. Jack shrugged, his expression cold and detached. Maybe I've just had enough, Jess. Enough of this domestic bliss you keep trying to shove down my throat. I'm out there busting my ass every day, and I come home to this nagging and suspicion. You want to know where I've been? Out, where I don't have to deal with this crap. With those words, he grabbed a beer from the fridge and headed towards the living room, leaving me standing there, a mix of disbelief and anger coursing through me. As I heard the TV flick on, the familiar sound of laughter from some late-night show filling the house, I realized that the gap between us had grown too wide to bridge with mere words. The day started like any other, with Max's laughter filling the house as I juggled work and household chores. But a call from Mr. Harris changed everything. Jess, we need you in the office today. Big client coming in, and we can't do this without you, he said. I was torn. Max was down with one of his fevers again, and with Jack's unpredictable schedule, I couldn't just leave our son alone. I called Jack, hoping he'd understand the urgency. Jack, it's important. Mr. Harris needs me at the office. Can you come home early today? Max isn't feeling well. Jack's response was a cold splash of reality. Are you kidding me, Jess? You know I can't just leave work in the middle of the day. Handle it, like you always do. His words stung, but there was no time to argue. I called Helen, Jack's mom, and thank heavens, she agreed to help. Of course, dear. You go and take care of your work. Max will be fine with me. The meeting was intense, but we nailed it. Mr. Harris suggested celebrating at a nearby restaurant, and though my mind was at home with Max, I couldn't refuse. We settled into our seats, the clinking of glasses and the murmur of conversations around us. But as I scanned the room, my heart dropped. There, in a dimly lit corner, was Jack, his hand on another woman's, their heads close together in intimate conversation. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Mr. Harris noticed my pale face. Jess, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. I shook my head, not trusting my voice. I need a moment, I managed to say, my legs shaky as I stood up. I headed to the restroom, my mind racing. This couldn't be happening. Not Jack. Not us. But the truth was right there, laughing and flirting over candlelight. I splashed water on my face, trying to calm the storm inside me. As I looked in the mirror, a fierce determination replaced the shock. I wouldn't let this slide. Not this time. Back at the table, I apologized to Mr. Harris and the clients. I'm sorry, I need to take care of something urgent. Please excuse me. I left the restaurant, my mind a whirlwind of hurt and anger. Jack didn't even notice me leave, so engrossed was he in his affair. I made it home, my hands trembling as I opened the door. Helen was there, her concerned eyes meeting mine. "Is everything all right, dear?" I couldn't spill it, not then. "Just a rough day at work, Helen. Thanks for watching, Max." Helen gave me a knowing look. "Anything you want to talk about?" I forced a smile. "Nothing to worry about. Just work stuff." "Thanks again, Helen." After Helen left, the silence of the house wrapped around me. The image of Jack with that woman replayed in my mind. But I wasn't about to let anger take the wheel. This fury was fuel. Jack had made his choice, and now it was my move. The game had shifted, and as the night crept in, a plan began to form. A plan to make sure Jack regretted betraying the family he took for granted. The next morning felt heavy, like I was carrying a weight around my heart. Jack had left early, his usual routine, acting like nothing was wrong. But everything had changed for me. As I watched Max play, his innocence a stark contrast to the mess of our lives, I knew I had to act. But how? I couldn't just confront Jack without proof, and my word against his wouldn't hold up. I remembered a conversation with a friend about a private detective they had used. It seemed like a drastic step, but desperate times called for desperate measures. I waited until Max was settled with his video games, then I made the call. "Hello, is this Mr. Reynolds?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, this is he." "How can I help you, ma'am?" came the reply, professional and to the point. I took a deep breath. I need your services. I suspect my husband is involved with someone else. I need proof." Mr. Reynolds was all business. "I understand, ma'am. We handle these cases with utmost discretion. Can you tell me more about your situation?" I poured out the details, the late nights, the perfume, the restaurant incident. Mr. Reynolds listened without interruption, then said, "We can start surveillance on your husband immediately. We'll gather evidence and keep you updated. My fee is—" I agreed without hesitation. The price didn't matter, I needed the truth. Days turned into weeks, and each time Mr. Reynolds sent over photos or snippets of conversations, my heart sank a little more. Jack with the same woman, at restaurants, at a park, and once, chillingly, at a jewelry store. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion, each piece of evidence a brutal confirmation of Jack's betrayal. One evening, as I sat staring at the latest set of photos, Max came up to me. "Mom, why are you sad? Did something happen?" I quickly hid the photos and forced a smile. "It's nothing, honey. Just some work stuff. You know how it is." Max looked unconvinced. "If Dad is making you sad, I can tell him to stop. He should be nice to you." I hugged him, tears threatening to spill. "You're such a good boy, Max. But it's not your fight. Mom's got this under control, okay?" Max nodded, but his eyes still held worry. It broke my heart to see him like this, but it also steeled my resolve. Jack had to be held accountable, not just for me, but for Max's sake too. Max's 10th birthday should have been a day of joy and laughter, a celebration of a decade of life. The house was decorated, the cake was ready, and Max's eyes sparkled with excitement. But as the day unfolded, it became clear that it was going to be anything but typical. Jack, once the cornerstone of our little family, had been drifting away, his presence now just a shadow. This day was no different. "Jess, work slammed. I can't make it," he said over the phone, his voice as cold as the winter wind. I watched from the window as he drove off, leaving a cloud of dust and a heavy heart behind. Helen and George, Jack's folks, did their best to fill the void, their faces a mix of concern and disappointment. The party was in full swing, the sound of children's laughter a bittersweet melody. Then, out of nowhere, my phone shattered the calm. Jack's voice, panicked and loud, boomed through the speaker. "Our son's been hit. He's at the hospital now." The room froze, the festive air turning to ice. But there, right in front of me, was Max, safe and unharmed. "Jack, check your number." "Max is right here, safe and sound," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside. There was a pause, a moment of silence that felt like an eternity. Then, a quiet, "Sorry, wrong number," before the line went dead. The room was thick with confusion and unspoken questions. I gently nudged Max towards his room, his new video game in hand. "Go on, sweetie." "I'll be right there," I said, mustering a smile that felt more like a grimace. Once Max was out of sight, I turned to face Helen and George. Their faces were a mix of shock and worry, a silent demand for an explanation hanging in the air. "Helen, George, there's something you need to know," I began, my heart heavy. "Jack hasn't just been buried in work. He's involved with someone else. They have a child together, a little boy." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Helen's eyes welled with tears, and George's jaw clenched, his anger barely contained. "Jess, are you certain?" Helen's voice was a whisper, her world crumbling. I nodded, the truth a bitter pill. "I've seen them, heard their conversations. It's undeniable." The room was silent, the weight of betrayal pressing down on us. "We're with you, Jess. Our son, doing this, it's unforgivable," Helen said, her voice quivering, but strong. George stood up, his posture rigid with resolve. "Jack will have to face us, to explain this madness. He owes you, answers." The rest of the day was a haze. The candles were blown out, the cake was cut, but the joy was overshadowed by the storm that loomed on the horizon. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the room, I realized that this was no longer just my battle. That evening, the house was quiet, too quiet. It was the calm before the storm. I sat in the living room, Helen and George by my side, the air heavy with anticipation. We were waiting for Jack, the man who had shattered our lives with his deceit. The door creaked open, and there he was, sneaking in like a thief, unaware of the confrontation that awaited him. He tiptoed towards the stairs, but before he could take another step, I flicked on the light. "Evening, Jack. How's your son? The one who got hit by a car?" I asked, my voice calm, but laced with a venom that made him freeze in his tracks. Helen and George sat there, silent sentinels, their eyes fixed on Jack, waiting for his response. Jack's face went pale, his facade crumbling. That was a bad joke, Jess. I didn't mean it." I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. "A joke? Is that what you call it?" Without another word, I threw the photos and documents on the table in front of him. Each picture, each piece of paper, a testament to his betrayal. "This is no joke, Jack. This is your other life, laid bare for all to see." Jack's eyes darted from the photos to his parents, the magnitude of his actions finally sinking in. I can explain," he stammered, but his words fell flat. "You're done talking, Jack. These pictures, these documents, they speak louder than any lie you could come up with," I said, my resolve steel. Helen let out a sob, her hands covering her face. George's expression was stone, his disappointment a tangible force in the room. "To think our son would stoop this low," he muttered. Jack turned to his parents, desperation in his eyes. "Mom, Dad, But George cut him off, his voice firm and final. "You've made your bed, Jack. Now you lie in it. I'm cutting you off. Everything you would have gotten goes to Max." Jack looked at me, a last-ditch plea in his eyes. "Jess, please. I'll do anything. Don't do this." But the time for mercy had passed. "You had your chance, Jack. Now it's time you face the consequences. I want a divorce, and I'll make sure you pay for every heartache you've caused." The room was silent, the finality of my words hanging in the air. Jack, defeated and broken, gathered his things, his departure marking the end of our life together, but the beginning of a new chapter for me, for Max, for us. Days after Jack's departure, the echo of the door slamming still hung in the air, like a bad odor. I thought I'd seen the last of the drama, but I was dead wrong. The doorbell rang, a sharp, intrusive sound that felt like an invasion. Standing there, with a smirk that could sour milk, was Jack's mistress, her confidence as misplaced as her morals. Well, if it isn't the jilted wife. Time to pack up, darling. Jack's with me now, and so's everything that was yours. This pretty little house? I'm thinking curtains, maybe some new furniture. Her words were like nails on a chalkboard. I couldn't help but laugh, the sound bitter. You're dreaming if you think you can claim my house. This place? It's from my family. Jack couldn't lay a claim on it if he tried. Her smug expression faltered, confusion and anger warring on her face. She whipped out her phone, her false nails tapping furiously. Jack, you better explain this right now. You said this house was ours. In no time, Jack was at the door, his face ashen. The house, it's Jess's, he stammered, avoiding my gaze. The mistress's face turned a shade of red I didn't know existed. You pathetic liar. You promised me a fairy tale, and now you're telling me it's just a bedtime story? I watched the drama unfold, my arms crossed, a smirk playing on my lips. But I had one more card to play. Seems like we're airing dirty laundry today. Why not throw in these? I said, slapping the photos on the table. Looks like someone's been two-timing. Here you are, leaving a hotel with another man. Care to explain, sweetheart? The room erupted into chaos, a tornado of insults, accusations, and shattered illusions. I stood there, the eye of the storm, watching the destruction. Thinking of a paternity test, Jack? Might want to find out if you're really the daddy. The aftermath was a scene from a soap opera. The mistress, her dreams shattered, stormed out, leaving Jack standing in the ruins of his choices. And me? I stood tall, the victor in a battle I never wanted to fight. The final chapter of the tumultuous saga brought both closure and new beginnings. The divorce was more than a legal separation, it was the severing of ties that had bound me to a life of uncertainty and betrayal. Jack, in a desperate attempt to cling to a shred of dignity, underwent the DNA test, only to have his illusions shattered. The child he thought was his bore no trace of his DNA. Helen and George, once the loving grandparents and in-laws, now stood as my steadfast allies. George's decision to create a trust fund for Max wasn't just about securing a future for his grandson, it was a statement, a clear denouncement of Jack's actions. This boy's future won't be clouded by his father's shadow, George had said, his voice heavy with a mix of anger and resolve. The house, once filled with laughter, then whispers of betrayal, was now a sanctuary of peace. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Mr. Harris, or Tom as he insisted, visited. His presence had always been a source of comfort, but this time, there was a different energy about him. Jess, I hope it's okay, me dropping by like this, Tom began, his hands slightly fidgeting, a contrast to his usual composed demeanor. I offered him a smile, the familiarity of his presence a welcome comfort. Of course, Tom. It's always good to see you. He hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. Jess, I've been doing a lot of thinking, especially after everything that's happened. I've seen you handle life's curveballs with such grace and strength. It made me realize something I should have acknowledged a long time ago. The air felt heavy, charged with unspoken words and emotions. Tom, what are you trying to say? His gaze met mine, earnest and unwavering. I love you, Jess. Not just as the brilliant colleague you are, not just as the friend who's been by my side. I love you for the incredible woman you are, for the strength you embody. I want to be there for you, for Max, if you'll let me. The confession, honest and raw, stirred something within me. A mix of surprise, fear, and a flicker of hope. Tom, this is a lot to take in. I appreciate your feelings, truly. But I need time, to process, to understand what this means for me, for Max, for us. Tom nodded, understanding, etching his features. Take all the time you need, Jess. I'm not going anywhere. I just wanted you to know how I feel, to understand that whatever the future holds, I'm here. As he left, the silence of the house enveloped me. The words we'd exchanged echoed in my mind, a gentle yet profound reminder that life still had surprises in store, that maybe, the end of one chapter was simply the beginning of another.